Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're digging into what I believe is the most unforgiving, most underestimated, and most season-ending mistake elk hunters make, and that's misreading the wind in thermals. You can have the right setup, the right bull, the right calling sequence, the right timing, and still watch the entire opportunity evaporate because of one tiny mistake in how you approach the wind. It happens every single year. For me, it happens to brand new hunters, it happens to experienced hunters, and it even happens to guys who killed bulls the year before. Because the wind isn't just a factor in elk hunting, it's the entire game. You can fool elk with sound. You can fool elk with movement. You could even fool elk with decoys, but you cannot fool their nose. And that's why today we're going deep into the truth about how morning downhill air works, how midday switches happen, why drainages trap your scent, how micro-terrain shapes wind differently than the macro forecast, and how pressured elk used wind as an actual shield. But before we break down the details, we need to start with the single most important law of thermals that almost every September a lot of hunters ignore. Here's the rule. Thermals follow the temperature of the slope. In the morning, thermals fall until the sun warms the hillside. Once the sun heats the slope, thermals rise. Late in the day, when shadows hit and the hillside cools, thermals fall again. And here's the golden hunting rule tied to it. When thermals are falling, you must approach from below the elk. When thermals are rising, you must approach from above the elk. That way your scent gets carried away in either situation. Sidehill approaches can work either way, but only when micro-terrain breaks and wind deflection give you enough protection to stay undetected. If you ignore this rule, the law of the wind and thermals, nothing else in this episode matters. But when you understand it and start structuring your entire hunt around it, elk encounters become predictable instead of chaotic. Now let's break each part down. In section 1, we're going to talk about morning falling air and why early setups fail a lot of times. Most hunters blow their first opportunity of the day because they don't respect the morning downhill air. Before the sun hits the slope, all air is cooling and cold air falls. It moves down ridges, down fingers, down chutes, down the face of every hill in the shade. Even when the general wind is calm, the thermal is doing its own quiet work, sliding straight towards the elk's nose, right? If the sun hasn't hit the hillside yet, you're not sneaking into elk from above. You're sneaking your scent to them. This is the classic early morning mistake. Hunters hear a bugle, right? They get excited. They charge down the hill. Their scent is falling right into the bull's path, and the herd vanishes before they even get the setup started. People think the bull just moved or cut his cows earlier than expected. No, he smelled you. Morning thermals falling downhill are responsible for half the blown encounters in elk hunting. The fix: if the slope is still cool, shaded, you must approach from below. Stay lower, stay patient. Let the sun flip the thermals before making your move. And if you can't approach from below, you wait or you try the side hill, period. Discipline saves more opportunities than aggressive calling ever will. In section 2, we're going to talk about midday thermal switches, the silent killer of stalks. Once the sun hits the slope fully and starts warming the hillside, could be 8 a.m., could be 9 a.m., could be 10 a.m., just depends, right, on what the sun actually does in that spot. They don't flip like a switch, they transition, sometimes slowly, sometimes unpredictably, sometimes with a short stall where the wind feels like it's doing nothing. This is where so many midday stalks die. Hunters think because the sun is up and thermals are rising that everything's going to be okay, but oftentimes there's a lag, and elk know that lag better than you do. A hillside may be warming, but the draw directly next to it might still be draining cold air. A ridgetop might be heating, but one shaded cut on the backside is still falling. A chute may be mixed, half rising, half falling, depending on how the sunlight reaches it. This creates what I call the thermal chaos window, that 20 to 60-minute period when thermals don't know what they want to do. Elk bed during this window for one reason. It's the worst time for predators to approach without being scented. This is exactly why the golden rule matters so much. When thermals rise, you must approach from above. When thermals fall, you must approach from below. Midday switches determine which side of the mountain you should even be on. If you're on the wrong side, the elk win every time. And when you get a bull talking during a switch, most hunters rush the setup. They want it now. But this is when discipline separates the guys who get opportunities from the guys who educate the elk. You wait until the thermals stabilize. You do not move into the herd until you know the direction of the air. Rising thermals are your ally here, but only once they've actually arrived and remained steady. In section 3, we're going to talk about drainage traps, where scent goes to die. Drainages destroy more elk hunts than calling mistakes, not because they're unpredictable, but because they're too predictable. Here's why drainages are so dangerous. They channel air. They accelerate falling thermals. They amplify rising thermals. They carry scent further than normal wind, and they collect scent from every side hill slope feeding into them. A drainage is like a scent superhighway. You might think you're skirting the creek bottom or paralleling a herd or trying to cut off a bugling bull or creeping up a draw to get closer for a setup. But the entire time, your scent might be being funneled downhill into the straight shot, and an elk uses that funnel like motion detectors. This is one reason pressured elk rarely bed in drainages. They bed just above them, catching both the drainage flow and the wind swirling off the upper slope. If you enter a drainage when thermals are falling, you're probably done. Nothing you do will save the encounter. Drainages also have delayed sunlight, meaning they warm slower, they switch later, and they fall earlier in the afternoon. The translation here is that drainage thermal schedule is not the same as the hillside schedule. A lot of hunters don't account for this. The fix is to avoid them during falling thermals unless you're below the elk. Avoid them during rising thermals unless you're above the elk. And most importantly, never stalk through a drainage. Always use the ridges and side hills flanking it. In section 4, we're going to talk about micro-terrain wind behavior, where hunts are won and lost. Micro-terrain is where wind becomes unpredictable and where a lot of hunters underestimate what's actually happening around them. I'm talking about small cuts, benches, folds, finger ridges, rock outcrops, depressions, little pockets of timber. These tiny features shape wind and thermals differently than the surrounding slope. You can have rising thermals on the open slope and falling thermals in the shaded cut, swirling thermals in a bowl, sideways drift on a bench, vertical drop-offs that pull scent downward. This is why elk bed in micro-terrain pockets. The wind is inconsistent for predators, but highly consistent for elk. A bull bedded on a half-moon bench may catch falling air from above, rising air from the lower slope, a slightly lateral drift from the finger ridge, a stable breeze from the main drainage. It creates almost a 360-degree scent shield. This is the setup elk choose on purpose. Most hunters think they're being sly. Elk see that movement in their wind map before you ever take a step. The fix isn't avoiding microterrain, it's understanding when thermals are stable enough to move into it and knowing how the golden rule applies. Approaching from above only works when the rising thermals dominate that pocket. Approaching from below only works when falling thermals dominate that pocket. Sidehill approaches are the only flexible option, but also require you to test the wind constantly because a single micro cut can ruin everything. In section 5, we're going to talk about how pressured elk use the wind as a shield. This is the part of wind behavior a lot of hunters never even recognize. Pressured elk actively position themselves using the wind as a defensive shield. A pressured bull will bed where thermals hit him directly, feed where rising thermals give him the advantage, travel routes where he gets the downhill pull, stand in positions where he can scent check below and hear above, circle a calling setup to get the wind, slow his pace when he suspects something, and disappear into terrain where the wind constantly swirls to his benefit. Elk don't just respond to wind, they weaponize it. When you hear a bull circle you, he isn't wandering, he's using thermals like a radar. When a herd drops into dark timber in the late afternoon, they're not bedding early. They're positioning themselves for the evening falling air they know is coming. When a bull hangs up at 80 yards away, he's not stubborn, he's waiting for your scent. When a herd moves off the face earlier than you expect, it's because the hillside is about to lose sunlight and they know how the thermals are about to fall. Pressured elk don't just pay attention to sound. They don't just pay attention to movement. They trust one thing above all else: the wind. If your season fell apart because elk kept winding you, this is probably why. They weren't just lucky, they weren't random, they were using the mountain better than you were. Most hunters think the elk beat them, but the truth is the thermals beat them. Once you understand how falling morning air works, how rising air stabilizes, how drainage thermals trap scent, how microterrain alters wind patterns, how pressured elk use wind intentionally, you're going to no longer hunt elk with hope, you're going to hunt them with more clarity. So the rule here is non-negotiable. Falling thermals equal approach from below. Rising thermals equal approach from above. Side hills are when you can read the microterrain perfectly. If you ignored that rule, it probably cost you opportunities this year. If you master it, you will create opportunities you used to believe were impossible. Now, if you want to go deeper on this and actually build a full system around thermals, approach strategies, hunt planning, and becoming a more disciplined hunter, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness and backcountry strategies and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me, and a community of driven hunters who live relentless, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. If you're ready to train for the hunt, build a better system, and join a tribe that pushes you further, Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.